Welcome back to your operations management class. This week we'll be discussing supply chain management. We'll be conducting some analytics regarding supply chain management and also inventory management. Now, what exactly is supply chain management? The objective of supply chain management is to structure the supply chain to maximize its competitive advantage and benefits to the ultimate consumer. The coordination of all supply chains activities, starting with raw material and ending with a satisfied customer, is supply chain management. It includes the suppliers, the manufacturers, and or service providers, distributors, wholesalers, retailers, and of course the final customer. The strategic importance of supply chain management are the large portion of the sales dollars that are spent on purchases. Supplier relationship, increasingly integrated and long-term, is vital to the success of strategic importance of supply chain management. Improved innovation, speed design, and reduced cost, as well as managing supplier relationship, has added emphasis on the strategic importance. Now let's discuss some sourcing issues. Do we make or buy decisions? That's a key factor in all decision-making process that we undergo. Choosing between obtaining products or services externally as opposed to producing them internally. Outsourcing is considered the transfer of traditional internal activities and resources to outside vendors. It brings in efficiency and specialization and focus on core competencies. I'll give you an example. In my credit union, we outsource our human resource component to a third party. Why? Because the amount of dollars that we would have to spend on a full-time human resources professional, continue the training aspect to ensure that they continue with their skills, preferably being SHRM certified, Society for Human Resource Management certified in the areas of human resources, keeping up with labor management issues, new laws that are coming up, and so on and so on and so on. Well, we realized that it was more cost effective to pay a third-party vendor for a contract for those areas that we needed. Plus, they were experts in that field. The same thing with payroll. We don't have a payroll clerk, or we have ADP, and ADP does our payroll, and they provide that payroll to the HR component and to management so we can evaluate. That's with reports and on. Same thing with legal, our certified public accountants. We have a certified CFO in-house and an accountant in-house, but the majority of the reports that are generated for our insurance purposes and also for our National Credit Union Association, that's generated by our certified public accountant. Plus, we're required to have external and internal auditors. So instead of hiring internal auditors, we hire the external auditor. It's not the same as our external auditor, a separate one. It would be A, ethical, and B, logical to have the same auditors that are doing the external auditing, doing the internal. So we hire two external auditors to do our one external and one internal. Saves us time, money, effort in the long run. That's the beauty about outsourcing when it's cost benefit analysis was done and it provides a proven way of doing it. It also allows us to focus on our core competency, which is providing that best quality service to our consumers, to our members, in order to achieve the best financial returns for them. That's what it's all about. Now there's 6 sourcing strategies. One of those is you got to have many suppliers. There's another one called you have to have few suppliers. There's the vertical integration, there's the joint venture, there's the koratsu, and there's the virtual companies. Let's talk a little bit about having many suppliers. It's commonly used for commodity products. Purchasing is typically based on price. Suppliers compete with one another, and suppliers is responsible for technology, expertise, forecasting, cost, and quality of delivery. Few supplier, on the other hand, uses the buyer forms longer-term relationships with these fewer suppliers, creates value through economies of scales and learning curve improvements. Suppliers more willing to participate in just-in-time inventorying programs and contribute design and technology expertise. The cost of changing suppliers is huge, and trade secrets and other alliances may be at risk. Examples of few suppliers could be uh, the industries dealing with weapon systems for the United States government and jet planes, etc. Those are, if you want to switch from one supplier to the other, just the R&D alone, research and development alone, cost of those would be prohibitive to switch to suppliers. You'd have to wait for the next cycle to see who gets the award of the bid. Let's talk about vertical integration. It is the developing the ability of producing goods or services previously purchased. Integration may be forward, towards the customer, or backwards towards the supplier. It can improve cost, quality, delivery, and inventory, but requires capital, managerial skills, and demand. But don't think that this is the only one that requires capital, managerial skills, and demand. It's high intensive on those. The rest of them have to do the same thing. Risky in industries with rapid technological change, because the vertical integration doesn't necessarily talk to the sidelines. Joint ventures. These are formal collaborations. It enhances the skills, secures supplies, and reduces cost. The challenge is the cooperation aspect without diluting brand or conceding competitive advantage. The Keiretsu network is a middle ground between few suppliers and vertical integration. Suppliers become part of the company coalition, often provide financial support for suppliers through ownership or loans. Members expect long-term relationships and provide technical expertise and stable deliveries. May extend through several levels of supply chain, mainly practiced in Japan, but in some cases has been brought into the United States. Though we don't necessarily call it Keiretsu, we just call it collaboration. Virtual companies, something new. In fact, what we're having right now, it's a virtual discussion. Though it's not interactive, you're listening to my video feed, but it is, and it can be interactive in the very near future. You're going to be going through discussion boards, etc. That's a virtual, organization. So virtual companies rely on a variety of supplier relationships to provide service on demand. Fluid organizational boundaries, allowing the creation of unique enterprises to meet changing market demands. Relationships may be short or long term. It's up to the people involved. Exceptionally lean performance, low capital investments. It has plenty of flexibility, and of course, speed. Now, let's talk a little bit about building the supply base. Very important. The first thing you got to do is look at supplier evaluation. Find potential suppliers. You determine the likelihood of their becoming good suppliers. You look at what they have to sell, the quality of the product, how their timely delivery, changing of price, or do you contract for a specific price in a period of time? Large organizations can't do this. So we, in my organization, we belong to the equivalence of a keiretsu, but for the logistics side of the house. If it was just us buying the supplies, we would have to buy it at a normal rate, just like you would if you were buying. But because we belong to this consortium, then what we do is we go through this single source point. We contract with a single source point. That single source point is responsible for conducting the bids process, finding for all the credit unions throughout the South Indian region the best possible price point, and then we all buy from that single source. So what you have is a grouping of various credit unions that buy from a single source point that was generated from a third-party organization in the first place. So it really lowers our potential overhead costs, and it's a wonderful experience. Now, when you do the supplier evaluation, you also determine the likelihood of them being a good supplier by doing these evaluations itself and determining if they get here on time. We order the products. If it doesn't get here in time, we give feedback to the source point. Source points then makes the evaluation and studies. And at one point, if there's enough credit unions that provide negative feedback, they cancel contract and they start with the next supplier. So there is feedback. The loop is closed. Supplier certification, that's mainly what the source point does for us. It qualifies the vendor. It identifies the education needed to do the certification process, and of course the certification itself. Now, the education for the certification process, I don't want you thinking they're going to have to take like an MBA course or anything like that. That's not the case. The case is they have to learn and be educated on the software system that is being used in order to go ahead and create the bids, also how the bids are generated. They also do the RFP, whether it's a blind RFP and open RFP. Blind RFP means everybody puts in their request for proposal amounts, what they're going to produce, etc. There has to be very direct and specified areas for what the product is supposed to be, so that you don't have apples and oranges being compared. Obvious price point variance there. So those are the things that requires a certification. Supplier development. You integrate a supplier into your system. What are the quality requirements? Here's where you identify what the upper control limits are, what the lower control limits are. What are you shooting for, which is your actual central line? What are the product specifications? What are your schedules and delivery? Can you do it in a just-in-time inventory at 24 hours a day if need be? Because remember, last week we just did a study or an analysis where it was a bakery center that operated in 3 shifts, 8-hour shifts for 24 hours a day. Well, you just don't have the bakery ingredients all stocked up there, because what ends up occurring then is that you have the product getting bad before you even start the baking process. So you have to have a continuous flow of this material, the products itself. Procurement policies. Now, we have procurement policies currently in my organization. When I was a city manager, we developed the procurement policies of how we did it. It's very strict, very formal. It follows the Florida law of how to, state of Florida law, because government entities have to follow that. And also home rule is the county that you're in. So in Florida, so it depends on various parts of the United States. It's different, but generally they're the same, which is basically there is an established protocols and rules of how you're going to go ahead and do the request for proposals or request for quotes. There's also things called design and build proposals, or just design and just build. So it's a myriad. It depends on what you're looking for. There's training involved, and you train your suppliers on how to input the information. What are the stock items that you're looking for? What are the SKU number, SKU numbers that are assigned to each one of the product lines, so that's easily readable, RIF tags, if any, so on and so forth. So it's easier scanning. So when you receive the product, you scan it, and you have inventory management control made a lot easier. Talk to your accountant, because part of the inventory management control happens to be part of the accounting software that is in there. So if you're a small organization and you're using softwares, QuickBooks Pro, that has an inventory management section in there, very easy to go ahead and do if you have scanning capability. Engineering and production help. If you need specific engineering instructions of how to build things, or what are the specifications for the product, they can help you with this thing. And the thing is, the important part is trust, that you trust them and that they trust you. Once you've founded that relationship, now it's easier to do dialogue. And then information transfer procedures. How is this done? Is it done through emails, memorandums? Is it through specific folders that you're going to put in, files, etc.? What is it that you're going to do? Then we come to the negotiations. This is what I generally am very good at, because I negotiated, and I still do the negotiations aspect for my organization. And I've been a negotiator for many organizations before. It is a significant element in purchasing. You just don't take it. They say this is the price point. That's not necessarily true. You have to negotiate. But in the negotiation process, you have to have one thing, and that is knowledge. Never go into a negotiating table or a negotiation strategy without understanding the prices and the commodities that you are negotiating for. If you go in blind, you're going to be losing. If you go in with quality information and good research, you will know what is the appropriate price point that you should be paying. The part you're negotiating is, do you want to go ahead and pay for a premium or a discount? A premium is usually because you need the product like now and you didn't negotiate it. The discount is because A, you have substitute products you can use, but you'd rather use a specific brand of product because it's allegedly, or it's better, more reliable. You can receive less failure rates, etc. So you really want this one, but there are substitutes available. The key is this: at what price are they willing to pay for a contract that is long extended? So you want discounts. If I give you a multiple year contract, I want a discount versus a 1 year contract. Those are how you negotiate discounts. Cost-based price models are suppliers' open books. In other words, they have to tell you what they're actually paying in order to manufacture this thing. At the same time, you have to tell them what you're selling. So it's a mutual agreement. Market-based price model is based on published, auctioned, or indexed prices. This is very normal for the commodities business. So don't think like, well, how do you get this? Well, they actually publish these information. They actually publish the stuff. And auctions are open. They're open auctions. And index prices, we see that in the stock market all the time. Competitive bidding. Now that's what we normally do. We do competitive bidding. It's common policy for many purchases to have a minimum of 3 bids. Sometimes you have more. The key is, do you want open bids or closed bids? Closed bids means that you put in a bid and nobody knows what it is until the day of the opening of the bids. Then whoever, after examination, because you have to examine to make sure that what they bid on is exactly the product that they're going to sell you. You would not believe the number of unscrupulous clients that are out there, suppliers. They will tell you, no, this is what we're selling you, and these are the specifications. But when you get down to what is actually in the contract or the specifications, it's slightly different. You don't want slightly different. You want exact when you come to supplier. Unless, of course, you're interested also in allowing for substitutes. If that's the case, different. In production, though, people usually go for specific. And things like chemical, etc., now they can go with substitutes. The competitive bidding in the open source is everybody bids. There's a positive aspect to the open bid source, and that is that they actually fight among each other in order to get the lowest pricing. Some cases are willing. Some of these organizations are willing to undercut the others, even at a loss, in order to take the business away from them and keep control of the overall enterprise. Now, it all depends if you want to go ahead and allow that to occur or not, because the undercut means that they have to either be bonded or that you have alternate means of being supplied. Why do I say this? Well, they're undercutting you, but the supply, because they're not making a profit with you, may not be as readily available as those that they're making a profit on. So you have to make sure that if you are buying or if you're signing a contract with an undercut price, this is where information is crucial, that you have the ability to go to other sources if they blow or miss the deadline by X number of days, hours, minutes, etc. Right? It's almost like, let's say, a pizza. You order it from Pizza Hut, but you also order it from Papa John's. And then you tell him, he goes, okay, Pizza Hut, if you get here, if you don't get here within 5 minutes, I already have a place in the order with Papa John's, and I'm not accepting yours. And if they agree, that's fine. If they don't, okay, fine, you go with Papa John's. The key is you're making an implied contract or you're making an actual contract with them. Now, the competitive bidding does not foster long-term relationships. Why? Because you're constantly bidding out for the same project. That doesn't mean that you send out the request for proposal to others. You send it out to everybody, not just 3. You blanket it out, and then hopefully you will get 3. We normally say minimum of 3 bids, but sometimes there's only 2, and then there is a thing called sole source. which means you want to buy a product, but there's only one organization, one entity that makes that product. At that point, who sets the price point? Think about it. Okay, it's the person that making the product. You don't have a say in the price point. So there is no competitive bidding there because only it's sole source. The question is there a substitute? Generally for sole source, there is no substitute. They're first in the market. They got their product line. You really want that. They want to have competitive pricing because they want to attract everybody that they can, but they're the ones that set the price. Now, contracting. Contracting, you share the risk, but you also share the benefits and you create incentives. When we look at centralized purchasing, which is what I spoke about that my credit union does, you're leveraging volume, which is exactly what we do. You develop specialized staff. Well, it's not our staff, it's their staff. We contract them to have specialized staff for each one of the key deliverable components area. But if you had it internally, like the city of Miami has an internal specialized staff that actually buys and sell products, and that's how they do. Oil and petroleum on one side, paper products on another, furniture on another, cars on a third, and on and on and on. They buy a lot of products. When the city of Miami sends out a request for proposal for motor vehicles, they don't just buy one car, they buy a fleet. So normally speaking, let's say for police cars in the city of Miami, they usually buy 150 police cars annually. That's a lot of cars. So obviously when they do the request for proposal, they can do now. In this particular case, what they have is it's called a 3-year contract with the sheriff's organizations, the Florida Sheriff's Organization. The reason for that is the Florida Sheriff Organization puts out the request for proposal to all areas with the direct specifications of what a police car should look like. Then all the counties and all the municipalities and the entire state law enforcement, all the agencies within that are not federal, they buy from there. That gives them a lot of leverage volume. Consequently, the specialized staff is at the state level for the cars. And the products that they get are really cheap. But at the same time, it's the same car. It's the same cost, the same car that anybody would have. It's cheaper because of the leverage volume. But there are some specifications to a police car that we have to have. And that's the difference between a regular car and a police type of interceptor. And that is the alternator is a lot stronger, the radiator is larger, more capacity, because the idling time, etc. Tires are different, suspension systems are a little different. These are taken in, but still, the cars are cheaper than what you and I would buy because of volume. There is also a developer of supplier relationships. They maintain professional control, devote resources to selection and negotiation, reduce duplication of tasks, and promote standardization. That's why it's the beauty of centralized purchasing. E-procurement is becoming the wave. It's one of the big items that is happening now. It speeds purchasing, reduces the overall cost, and it integrates the supply chain. What used to be where people went to bidding process in physical, now it's done in electronic form. It's a wonderful thing. You have online catalog and exchanges taking place. You go into the forum, in virtual forum, and you place bids just like you would in a physical world, but it's done electronically. Standard items and industry-specific websites, that's where you go. Online auctions, low barriers to entry, reverse auctions for buyers, and price not always the most important factor. If you're going to outsource, the new terminology to the word outsource, it's called third-party logistics. The acronym is 3PL. It used to be called your outsourcing. Now it's just 3PL. Your third-party vendors or third-party logistics. This is outsourcing logistics that can reduce your inventory, your cost, and improve delivery reliability and speed. Mechanics use this third-party logistics all the time. Why? Because they don't want to keep stock available stock inventory on hand that they're not using all the time. So they have these third-party logistics that basically sell the same product to multiple areas and keep it. They keep the stock. When you need it, they do it. They send it out to you. That's also known as just-in-time inventory. So third-party logistics and just-in-time inventory is integrated system. They coordinate supply inventory with delivery services. So how long will it take to deliver to your location? If they don't have it, they will go ahead and call you back saying, I don't have it, but it's coming out of another location that is 6 miles away, 6 miles further away. Estimated time of arrival is 30 minutes longer than the normal operations allowance was per contact. But at least you let them know, and those are areas that you're willing to work with or not. Now, if you have multiple suppliers, then the issue is this: well, we're sorry, you don't have it, so let me call and make the other one in. And that you look at the timing. May provide warehousing, assembly, testing, shipping, customs, all that stuff. If you're shipping out of here, then you have to go and make sure that you're following federal laws for the shipping. Containerized, there's a specific form you got to fill out, whether or not you're having lithium batteries, any explosive chemicals, and on and on and on. And then you have to have a certifying agent that does the certification. That costs money. In fact, I believe, according to my wife's business, it's about $37.50 per container. And I'm not talking about the huge containers. I'm talking about a box. All right. So if you're sending it through the postal service, it's about $37.50 to get it certified, and then it gets certified. If you're talking about large containers, each individual package that goes into that container has to be certified. So you can imagine the cost that is in one of those large, very huge containers at $37.50 a package. All right. So distribution management. The outbound flow of products. You're distributing the products that are out there, and you're looking for rapid response, product choice, and services. Your increase in number of facilities generally improves response time and customer satisfaction, which is what UPS does, what DHL, all of these logistics companies have. They have major nodes, and then from the nodes they move them out. So let's look at, if you ever have a chance, go ahead and look at in YouTube the process of how Federal Express does their shipping. Very, very enlightening and educational, of course. So what you do is they come and they pick up the package from a place, and it's done by a small truck. From there, it goes to a warehouse area, where then it goes to a larger truck. If it's close by the airport facility, then it goes directly to the airport. But if it's not, that larger truck then takes it over to the airport facility. Airport facility then sorts it out and puts it in the appropriate plane that's going to the destination necessary. It lands in a central hub. There's an exchange of the packages taking place. It drops off packages. It takes on packages. And then the plane goes off, and the package goes to the other plane, and it takes off with the package. All processing. Then it lands in another hub, offloads the package, takes it to the big truck, big truck then takes it to the hub puts it in a smaller truck and delivers it to your house. The last section, that last section is called the last mile. It's not exactly 1 mile. It could be 5 miles, 10 miles, depending on the city's demographics and growth. But that last mile is important, and sometimes you third-party contract your final last mile distribution. Sometimes you don't. All right. It all depends on how your logistics management numbers come out, and whether you want to retain control of the last mile management or not. Now, when we continue talking about distribution management, we also have to look at the facilities. Remember last week we ended up with location. Well, that's very important, because your facility's location is of grave consequence if you pick the wrong spot. If you are a logistics throughput location and your facility does not have readable access to major highways, then you're in trouble. If you are requiring rail and you're not close to rail, now you're in trouble. So if you need an airport and you're further away than most, then you are in trouble. That's why last week I mentioned I ended up with Doral, the city of Doral, being one of the major central hubs of logistics throughput in the South Florida region. Why? It's right exactly next to the airport. So they only have to travel 5 or 6 miles and they're there. The same thing with the port. And it's only 20 miles to the port from there. So, and it's fairly easy access because you have the major highways and now they have a new tunnel that goes directly under the port. Distribution management also wants you to select and develop dealers or retailers. You're developing them. They have to get to know how you want things done, and they will know how they want their things done. So easy communication flow. You talk the same language, same forms, etc. Downstream management is as important as upstream management. This is where you have to understand that if you're going to push the management of the logistics up, it's push versus pull. So either way is how do you figure out what your supply chain performance is? How do you know whether you are going to be push or pull? Well, it depends. It depends on your measuring of supply chain performance. If you want to be a push, you have to calculate that they, the suppliers, are automatically going to know that X number of months have passed, or X number of days, or X number of hours, or whatever, and they will push the product out. That means you don't have to put an order. They automatically push it. Good example of this would end up being coffee producers. I belong to a club, and what they do is they push the coffee to you. They know that I will consume, not me personally, my entire family will consume 5-pound bag of coffee per month. So they automatically push the 5-pound coffee bag because they figured out that by the time it is week 3.5, I'm running out of coffee. So they push the coffee to me and it arrives just in time for me to run out. That has worked marvelously for the past 3 years. So I don't have a problem. I also don't have to think about it. It's magic. It happens. It's the same thing with the measuring supply chain performance. Now, how do you determine? Well, you have to assess the assets committed to inventory. And how do you do that? Well, you have to calculate the percentage invested in inventory. That's assets committed to inventory. So what's my percentage of assets committed to inventory? Well, you divide your average inventory investment over your total assets, and you multiply times 100 to get a percentage. For example, Home Depot, this is all for example, by the way, Home Depot had $11.4 billion inventory, total assets of $44.4 billion. If we wanted to know the percentage of invested in inventory, then it's 11.4. That's your Home Depot had 11.4 billion in inventory divided by total assets, which was 44.4 times 100 gives you 25.7%. What does that mean? Well, 25.7% of all the assets happens to be inventory, money that was invested in inventory. The rest is either a fixed asset, truck, whatever, or stuff that they're not going to sell, that is there, like the actual physical building, the stuff that's inside the building that you shelve everything in. Inventory turnover is something very important. Inventory turnover is the cost of goods sold divided by the average inventory investment. Why is this important? Well, inventory investment deals with the average of several periods, it's the beginning plus ending. So the beginning inventory, plus your ending inventory divided by 2. Why? Because you're averaging it out. Ending inventory. So you're looking at the average of several periods, inventory, the beginning plus ending divided by 2, and the ending inventory. Let's look, for example, PepsiCo. Yes, they're the ones that make Pepsi, but they sell a lot of other stuff other than Pepsi products. The PepsiCo annual report, let us say, had a net revenue of $32.5 billion. The cost of goods sold was $14.2 billion. Their inventory, raw material inventory, was 74.74 cents each, work in process 0.11 cents each, and finished goods inventory 0.84 each. So the total inventory investment was 1.69 each. So if we go ahead and put the net revenue at 32.5 instead of billion, we just put 32.5. Cost of goods sold, instead of billions, we just put it at 14.2. Then you divide the 14.2, which is cost of goods sold, over the $1.69, and you get 8.4. So your inventory turnover is 8.4 cycles. Why do you need to know that? Well, if you have poor inventory turnover, you're going to have a problem with your cash flow if you're selling your product at discounts, or if your product line is slightly above your break-even point. So the key here is are you making a profit? If you're relying on a high inventory turnover and your cycle time happens to be 2, then you have to sell 2 for every period, and then what? So the higher your inventory turnover, the faster is your cash flow. That's another way of looking at it. Weeks of supply. Weeks of supply is the average inventory investment divided by the annual cost of goods sold divided by 52 weeks. All right, so for PepsiCo, the inventory investment was 1.69 billion. The average weekly cost of goods sold was 14.2 billion divided by 52 weeks, or 0.273 billion. So the weeks of supply is 1.69 billion divided by 0.273. That equals 6.19 weeks. So your average weekly cost of goods sold, or the weeks of supply is available at that time based on the information that you just garnered. Weeks of supply is 6.19 weeks. Comparison with benchmark firms. This is where you go ahead and have to have individuals research other companies. Normally you look at the typical firm and you look at benchmark firms. Orders fill rates. Let's just say this is, if you look at your textbook, this is table 11.7 of supply chain metrics in consumer packaged goods industry. Again, that's table 11.7. This is the comparison with benchmark firms. You have a typical firm and you have benchmark firms. Order to fill rate. Typical firm is 71%. The benchmark is 98%. Why are you benchmarking with a 98% versus 71? Because you're trying to achieve the benchmark with the best of the best companies. You're striving to get there. You're using SMART goals, to get there. Order fulfillment and lead time days. 7. The benchmark is for the company benchmark firms is 3. Cash to cash cycle time in days. 100. Benchmark firm is 30. See the big difference? And inventory days of supply, 50 and 20. Why would a typical firm has 50? Because they're paying a lot for the 50, while a benchmark firm has 20. Why? Because their cycle time is a lot faster. Their order fill rate is 98%. Order fulfillment lead time is 3 days only, and cash to cash cycle time is 30. They're able to do this. That's why they're capable of reducing the inventory days of supplies, because they know that they're going to be resupplied continuously. Now, benchmarking in supply chain management is extremely useful, but it may not be adequate enough. You need to conduct audits to ensure that you have continuing communication, that there's an understanding of what's going on, that there is trust among the vendors and yourself, performance and corporate strategy. Fosters a mutual belief that we are in this all together. Now let's talk a little bit about supply chain analytics. Supply chain analytics is important to identify when things can happen. When are there going to be potentials for disruptions? In South Florida, we have two types of disruption that usually happens a lot. All right. One of them are wildfires. They shut down highways because the fires on both sides prevent us from moving throughput product from one end of the state to the other. The other is the hurricanes. So we know that this happens, so we have to, manage our risk, and we evaluate risk using a nice little formula. So you look at, for a nice given supply cycle, the probability of n suppliers, the number of suppliers, being disrupted. So how do we calculate? So you look at P, right? P to the n, so the number of suppliers, is equal to S, and the S is the probability of a super event, like a hurricane, an earthquake, a typhoon, a tsunami, and those big events that would disrupt all suppliers simultaneously. The U in the formula, right, S plus 1 minus S times U. The U is the probability of a unique event that would disrupt only one supplier, and the L, the financial loss incurred in the supply cycle if all suppliers are disrupted. So what you're looking to see is the marginal cost of managing a supplier. When you put all this together, you have pretty much a good answer. So the question that begs, because you have all this information, assuming you have all this information, because if you don't, then you can't calculate it, is how many suppliers do I need? If you have a portfolio of suppliers to balance cost and risk, that's a good thing. In fact, in my credit union, the regulators constantly harp at us to have a portfolio of suppliers, because if we run into a risky situation, we need to keep the business operating. Evaluate 1, 2, or 3 suppliers using a decision tree. So let's do a quick example. Let us assume, right, that your S, remember that your S ends up being the probability of a super event that would disrupt all suppliers. All right. Remember, the U is a unique event. So if your S is 0.5%, your U, unique event, is 4%. Your C, which ends up being the marginal cost of managing a supplier, and that ends up being 10,000. And your L, which is the financial loss incurred in a supply cycle if all suppliers were disrupted, is 10 million. And so you put all those together and you start realizing that for the probability of your first supplier, of one supplier going bad, is 0.005. Your probability you multiply it times each one of those categories, and you end up with the first one, 4.48%. The second one is 0.6592%. The third one is 0.5064%. That doesn't mean that you always go with only one supplier. If the probability of it being disrupted is 4.48% because it's small, you're saying, okay, what's the probability of this happening? 4.4. I don't want to have that. Well, believe it or not, you do want to have multiple suppliers. But here's the kicker. You may want to have one supplier, but you may want to also contract with 2 or more suppliers that are outside of the impact area. Logical, right? You would be amazed at how many people pick suppliers. They come in with, oh, but I'm at the standard. The standard is multiple suppliers, and I have them all. It does no good if they're 20 miles away from each other. Because if the hurricane hits, what's the probability that all 3 are going to be hit? 100%. Hurricanes don't move around in 20-mile increments. They move around in hundreds of miles increment. So the normal course of business for, at least for us here in Florida, especially South Florida, is we look at suppliers that are way away. It's not, if I'm in the south, in the east coast of Florida, I go to the west coast. No, because too many hurricanes traverse east to west or west to east. We normally go north. So and at the same time, we have somebody in the local area, we have somebody in the northern section of the state, and we even have a third supplier that is outside the impact area of, now it takes a lot longer, but it gets here. So it's outside. We usually go up to the north, like Chicago, New York, etc. Even though recently we've had a hurricane actually miss us and hit New York. That was interesting. But that's the probability. Now, who comes up with a probability? You, for especially hurricanes. Well, we go to the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric, the NOAA, and they provide us with that information. We plug it in, and it works. When you put the tree, when you actually design the tree in itself, it tells you what happens if all three fails, what happens if two fail, what happens if one fail, and then it tells you what your cost is going to end up being. And what do? Well, you can take out insurance for those. Right? It's not your typical insurance. You just go ahead and take out the insurance of this, and we have a bonded, a small insurance bond for performance and all that. And that, for us, we only do 6 months worth of that. So I can't disclose that amount, but we decided to 6 months. Some companies do 3 months. Some companies do more than 6 months. It depends on if it's catastrophic, etc. How does it work? Now, supplier selection analysis. Manufacturers play the role. You usually choose the one with the lowest bid, but that's becoming rare. Factors weighing the techniques of multiple include assigning a weight and a score. Choose a supplier with a best weighted score. And then you come up. But the decision as to what you're looking for is management's. If it's price only, you go with price. But if you're looking for sound delivery methods, that they don't, the breakage during transport, things of that nature, what's important to you and your customers. Next, let's talk about inventory management. It is the objective of inventory management to strike a balance between inventory investment and customer service. One of the most expensive assets of many companies, representing as much as 50% of total invested capital. Less inventory lowers costs, but increases chances of running out. Stock out also means cost to you. More inventory raises costs, but always keeps customers happy. It's a balance. That's all it is. You have to have a balance between the two. And how do you do this? Well, you got to understand that some of the functions of inventory is to provide a selection of goods for anticipated demand. So you have to figure out what is the anticipated demand, and to separate the firm from fluctuations in demand, seasonal trends, accidents, in stuff that's happening. For example, if we have a hurricane, what goes up in sales? Home Depot, Lowe's, anything that sells lumber, construction goes up. And you have all of this going in. So, what is bad for one organization may be great for another organization. Functions of inventory include the decoupling of separate various parts of the production process. This you do to take advantage of quantity and discounts, and you hedge against inflation. Types of inventory include raw material. These are purchased but not processed. Work in process. That's a typical accounting term that we use. You put a value to that because you have to put that in your accounting reports. It's undergone some change but not completed. A function of cycle time for a product. Maintenance, repair, and operations necessary to keep machinery and processes productive and moving along. And then, of course, the finished goods product. These are completed products. Let's talk about some inventory models. We have the independent demand. This is the demand for items that's independent of demand for any other item in the inventory. Then there's dependent demand. The demand for items is dependent upon the demand for some other item in the inventory. Good example of dependent demand is if you buy an iPhone, you're also going to buy a case for it, and you're also going to buy the protective shield that you put on top of the glass. Holding cost is the cost of holding or carrying inventory over time. Ordering cost is the cost of placing an order, and setup cost is the cost of prepare machine or process for manufacturing a specific order. This may be highly correlated with setup time. Now, one of the things you need to determine is when and how to order. And here comes one of my favorite formulas. The basic economic order quantity, EOQ modeling. If anything, when you leave an MBA program, the least you can do is know how to do an EOQ model. So here we go. All right. You're going to learn about production order quantity model and quantity discount models. Let's look at the basic EOQ model. Here's some basic assumptions. The demand is known. It's constant and independent. All right. So that's an assumption. That means you will go with this, but it's an assumption. Lead time is known and constant. Receipt of inventory instantaneous and complete. Quantity discounts are not possible. Only variable costs are set up or ordering and holding. Stockouts can be completely avoided. These are some assumptions that are not entirely true, but you go with it because it's one of the better models to figure this thing out. Let's look at minimizing the cost. By minimizing the setup cost or the ordering and holding costs, total costs are minimized. You're trying to figure out what is the optimal order size or your Q star, and that will minimize total cost. You're going to pay, but you're going to pay less than if you miss the ordering cycle. A reduction in either cost reduces the total cost. Optimal order quantity occurs when holding costs and setup costs are equal. That's important, by the way. Holding costs and setup costs are equal. That's the optimum EOQ. Now, when you're doing the formula, the Q is the number of units per order. The Q star is the optimal number of units per order, or the EOQ. The D is the annual demand in units for the inventory item. The S is the setup or ordering cost for each order, and the H is holding or carrying cost. So you'd have to have the annual demand per units, the setup and ordering cost, and the holding or carrying cost to get your EOQ, that's Q star, or the Q, the number of units per order. Annual setup cost is the number of orders placed per year times the setup or ordering cost per order. All right, so how do we figure this thing out? Well, if you're going to do the annual setup cost, you look at the annual demand, right, your numbers of orders placed per year, divided by the number of units in each order, right, times the setup or order cost per order. Consequently, the formula ends up being, in parentheses, D over Q times S. So your annual setup cost is always going to be D over Q times S, or the annual demand in units for inventory divided by your number of pieces per order times the setup or ordering cost for each unit. So if you're going to go ahead and have your annual holding cost is the average inventory level times holding cost per unit per year, or order quantity divided by 2 times holding cost per unit per year. All right, so it'll be Q over 2 times H. H being holding cost of carrying cost per unit per year. Your optimal order quantity is found when your annual setup cost equals annual holding cost. Therefore, your annual setup cost, which is D over Q times S, has to equal Q over 2 times H in order for you to find out what the optimal order quantity is. So what do? You solve for Q, the Q star. Solving for Q star is 2 times the annual demand in units of inventory times the setup or ordering cost per year is equal to Q squared times H. Q squared equals 2 times your annual demand in units per inventory times S, which is the setup or ordering cost for each unit, divided by H, your holding and carrying cost, or Q star equals the square root of 2ds over H. If you're looking at the book, you'll see it. That's the purpose of this. So you have to go ahead and make sure that you're actually reviewing the book before you watch the video, or else this will start sounding like, okay, this guy's spitting off all sorts of formulas. How am I going to get this? Well, you got to look at the book first and then come over, then you'll understand what that is. Keep the formulas handy because the formulas are always helpful. Now let's give a quick example of the EOQ, and EOQ would end up being determine the optimal number of needles to order. D is 1,000, S is $10 per order, H, the holding cost, is 50 cents per unit per year. So to find the Q star, or the EOQ, economic order quotient example, is the square root of 2D times DS over H. So 2 times 1,000, which is D, times 10, which is $10, which was 10 ds, over 50 cents equals the square root of 40,000 or 200 units. That's your economic order quotient. So let's determine the expected number of orders. Again, D is 1,000, S is 10, H is 50 cents. Your Q star, or your economic order quotient, is 200. The expected number of orders is N equals the demand, which is 1,000, over the order quantity, right, which is 200. You just figured it out. And that gives you 5 orders per year. So the expected number of orders is 5 per year. The optimal time between orders, right? Everything else is being given. You just found out 2 things. Q star, or the EOQ, equals 200, and the N is 5 orders per year. Your expected time is T, capital T, which is the number of working days per year, which is 250, all right? That's a given, over 5, which is orders per year. So 250 divided by 5 is 50 days between orders. Total annual cost. Total cost, right? Total annual cost is setup cost plus holding cost. Total cost equals D, or the 1,000 units, over the $200, which is the 200 units, which is your Q star EOQ, right, times $10, or 10, plus 200, which is your Q star, divided by 2 times 50 cents. So when you figure it all out, you realize that your total annual cost is $100, or 50 plus 50. When you're including actual cost of material, which is P, total annual cost equals setup cost plus holding cost plus product cost. So all you're doing is adding the PD at the end. The EOQ model is robust. It's workable. It works even if all parameters and assumptions are not met. The total cost curve is relatively flat in the area of EOQ. Let's go over real briefly about reorder point, because that's usually where everybody goes. EOQ answers how much is the question. How much are we ordering? The reorder point is, when do we order? And this is where to prevent stock out. Reorder point, you have to think about the lead time. So reorder point is the demand per day times lead time for a new order in place, so you don't run out of stock. Therefore, D times L is your reorder point. D is obviously D over the number of working days in the year. All right. So in order to look at this, let's talk about iPhones. All right. Demand is 8,000 iPhones a year. You have 250 working days per year. Your lead time for order is 3 working days, may take sometimes 4. Therefore, D equals D over number of working days per year, or 8,000 divided by 250, or 32 units. Very simple. Your reorder point is D times L. Therefore, 32 units per day, right, times 3 days. That's your first one, 3 working days. It's 96 units. If you multiply times 4, it's 128 units. So when you hit, all right, when you hit the amount, which is 120, when you hit 128 days and it's the 4-day cycle, you order. When you hit the 96 unit, it's a 3-day cycle, you order. That's your reorder point optimum. You will not run out of stock. Now, there are other things you can discuss. We can discuss quantity discount models. We can go ahead and just, but the only thing I'd like for you to understand about quantity discount models is when you analyze the quantity is you're starting with the lowest possible purchase price, calculating the Q star, the EOQ model, until the first feasible EOQ is found. This is possible. This is a possible best order quantity, along with all price breaks quantity for all lower costs. So you calculate the total annual cost for each possible order quantity determined in your first step of the process. We would go into the example in itself, but I would tell you that it'd be better if you go to the book and look at it, because it'll make a lot more sense than me just talking about it. The other ones were fairly simple. This is a bit more complex, so it'd be best to go ahead and do it. But I want you to understand that quantity discount examples, or the quantity discount examples in your book, Very important. Go over them. At least you'll understand what they mean. You also have to look at things like safety stock examples, and another one is to look at is the probabilistic models of safety stock. Why is safety stock important? Well, just in case that probability aspect that we just discussed about EOQ, if you miss it by a certain amount, you want to have a probabilistic safety stock analysis so that you know the amount to add to safety stock to make sure that when you hit that, you're okay. So safety stock plus EOQ, that's when you order, if you do the probabilistic safety stock analysis. All right. Well, I thank you for taking time and being with me today. I appreciate it, and I look forward to next week. Have a great day.